Good evening, everyone. I'm Linda Ayers. Welcome to Tuesday Talks DC, brought to you by Cleveland and Woodley Park Village, Cleveland Park Main Street, Woodley Park Main Street, and the DC Public Library. We encourage you to join in the conversation at any time tonight by posting your comments and questions using the chat function on your screen. And at the end of the presentation, Pat Whitty from the Village will moderate a Q&A session. Tonight's talk features two multi-talented Woodley Park residents, Barry Byrne and Scott Cedar, who met in what's called a showmance when they appeared together at the New Playwrights Theater in Dupont Circle. They married in 1983. Barry is an actor and self-described political junkie who joined the satire troupe, The Capitol Steps, in 1993, and was with them for 28 years until they turned off the lights in 2021. She's also a lyricist and librettist, writing opera adaptations for DC's In series and Poor Richard's Opera Company in Philadelphia. She also was nominated twice for the Helen Hayes Award as a playwright and as a lyricist. Scott is an actor and singer who's appeared on most area stages, most recently at Ford Theater in Into the Woods, and at first staged Tyson's play called Trying, playing Judge Francis Biddle, former Attorney General under FDR and Chief Judge at the Nuremberg trials. Scott regularly appears at the Smithsonian with Daniel Stashower, reading the works of literary greats. Just recently, he and Barry voiced some of Agatha Christie's most beloved characters as part of the Smithsonian program. Scott's visual art has appeared in the Washington Post magazine, in design publications, and in local exhibitions. In 2010, he was an artist in residence at Evergreen Museum in Baltimore. So welcome, Barry and Scott. It's a pleasure to have you here tonight.
Thank you so much. We appreciate that welcome and the introduction.
Hi, everyone. Yeah.
We're so happy to be with you. Thank you also to Frank behind the scenes, and we're looking forward to chatting with Pat when we have some questions. We'd like to start with a few stories, and as I said, once we finish that, we'll have a chance to speak with one of you or several of you.
Get some questions and answers.
Linda mentioned that Barry's one of a number of women playwrights in our community. I'm going to mention a few of others. Kathleen Akerley, Renee Clarko, Allie Curran, Joan Cushing, Colleen Sinette Jennings, Jennifer Nelson, and Karen Zacharias, who, by the way, is one of the most produced playwrights in the country. We've had the pleasure of working with many of them.
Yeah. And we also have a number of women artistic directors of theaters, including Kate Breyer, Jennifer Nelson, Rebecca Medrano, Joy Zinnemann, Allison Stockman, Maria Manuela Goyanes, Carolyn Griffin, and Molly Smith. Now, historically, Frankie Hewitt helped bring Ford's Theater back to life, but most people might single out Zelda Fitch-Handler at Arena Stage as the theater doyenne emerita.
Ooh, I like that.
Well, you should, you wrote it. And of course, we couldn't do this without donors, and we've been backed by the generosity of Jaylee Mead, Carolyn K. Fritz, and Clarice Smith, philanthropists, and among others.
Well, we're mentioning this because we know that it's the History Month, March, but we'd like to spotlight a lesser known and equally important figure in Washington, D.C. theater, Mary Goldwater. She was one of the founders of the Theater Lobby, which was an extremely influential theater here from 1950 to 1972. We shared a link with Pat for that.
We bring Mary Goldwater to your attention because her non-professional theater was a model for the kind of professional theater that we have been associated with in DC. Mary and her co-founder, Mary Averett Seeley, operated
a 75-seat art theater for aesthetically and socially adventurous theatergoers. I'm reading that, needless to say. This is from a kind of scholarly paper that we've found. We also have a link to this for this. It eliminated the distance between performers and audience, making a carriage house in Georgetown the first identifiable small theater in the area. Theater Lobby's commitment and to it's kind of an amateurism made it profoundly a Washington theater. A company of actors represented the broad cross-section of the city's workers, lawyers, government workers, store clerks, house painters, secretaries. Its amateur status was not viewed as a negative, even though the press categorized it as a community theater.
Now, the Theater Lobby was a real eye-opener for audiences accustomed to the Broadway-sized National Theater or the Warner, where actors' bodies were kind of miniature and their faces were all but indiscernible. I'm squeezing your head. Numerous reviews of Theater Lobby's productions include the late 1950s and early 1960s, and they mention the intimate playhouse and made particular point of the close relationship between the actor and the audience.
From 1982 to 2006, our theater community offered the Mary Goldwater Award, which is another way that we're recognizing her tonight, and that is its own story. The award ceremony was quite fun. We've provided a link for you to consider checking that out if you're interested.
One of the other women playwrights, Kathleen Akerley, recalled the Mary Goldwater Awards fondly. My favorite aspect, she said, of the Mary Goldwater Awards is that the award recipients did not speak. So you didn't have anyone standing there horrifying his or her peers with the kinds of speeches that you sometimes hear at these award ceremonies. And when I received my award, I stood silent and appreciative while Lana Schaeferitz did an interpretive dance of my career. Hilarious, excellent, low-key, and run by judges who passionately loved theater in all its forms and of any scale. And again, we've attached a link so that you can read further if you're interested.
We loved that quote from Kathleen Akerley. We also love her work. Theater Lobby closed just before Barry and I arrived, but its success inspired several other groups to try to build upon that smaller theater model. These small companies focused on a particular aspect of theater, or they presented theater of identity. DC's Black Repertory, Pro Femina, which later became Horizons, and Gala Hispanic are all theaters of identity. New Playwrights Theater, where we met, Washington Stage Guild, Woolly Mammoth, Source, Studio, Washington Shakespeare Company, Actors Theater of Washington. These are other small theaters that built on that model.
And how successful was this new model, Scott?
Well, when we arrived in Washington, there were at most 10 theaters producing plays. In the 45 years that have followed, that number climbed to 90.
90.
Not all were professional now, those 90, but that number is still something to celebrate. So we want to say thank you,
Mary Goldwater.
So, Barry, people in the arts do not just pop up out of the ground. Usually someone encourages the young artist's work. Who encouraged you?
Well, my parents, especially my father, my parents made sure that I saw a lot of shows. Even though we were in Cincinnati, we could see travel, national tours. They bought me show albums, Broadway show albums, which I then committed to memory. And every holiday season, I would get a new D'Oyly Carte Opera Company recording of the Gilbert and Sullivan operetta. And I think it was, for years, I thought everybody got Gilbert and Sullivan operettas from their parents for the holidays, but what do I
Turns
know?
out many of the Capitol Steps were big Gilbert and Sullivan fans.
True. What about you, Scott?
Well, my parents did not know what to do with me, so I would
understand.
not say they were particularly interested in encouraging my theatrical interests. However, my father was a physician, and I thought for a time that was going to happen. He wisely, I think, tried to show me the ropes there. I once saw an autopsy for those of you who are interested. And I had some illness, so it kind of made sense that I not do that. But I did have some teachers who were very encouraging, especially for my singing, which was great. I really appreciate that. And I had a mentor in Denver who had a small theater, much like
The ones here?
yes, these theater, the small groups.
Now, neither of us is a native Washingtonian, and we arrived separately. I came in 75, you came in 76. I'm originally from Cincinnati, Ohio, and Scott is from Denver. Now, I had originally had another job lined up with an improvisation group in Cambridge, Massachusetts. I had just graduated, gotten my graduate degree from Emerson, and I auditioned for this group. But the job fell through when they offered my spot to a former company member who asked to return after recovering from a nervous breakdown. Folks, it's the arts.
That's right.
This stuff happens. So I came to DC because my dad had cousins here, and they offered me a place to stay.
It was also time for me to leave Denver. I had met a fellow singer at the Central City Opera.
Dated her too.
Yes. She was living in Arlington, Virginia, and going to school at Curtis in Baltimore. We both agreed there was much more happening in DC than in Central City.
Now, in 1975, when I got here, Washington was still a pretty damaged place in need of repair. And for most people, the arts were not a high priority. A big part of downtown, 14th Street, was burned in the riots of the late 60s. And a number of store owners, grocers, and merchants had taken their businesses to the suburbs. So did we just waltz in and start performing on these small stages as soon as we arrived?
No, we did not.
We did not. We mentioned that the actors in the small theaters as being lawyers and government workers and store clerks and house painters. Separately, each of us found work as secretaries. I joined the advertising firm J. Walter Thompson, and Scott worked at the Office of Public Education for the U.S. Fire Administration, which was a Department of Commerce agency. So like so many other aspiring artists in the area, we needed conventional jobs to pay the bills. And not surprisingly, we brought our artistic talents to our day jobs.
Right. We'd like to share a little of that with you. I began writing and producing scripts for the National Fire Administration.
And I became a full-time copywriter and started writing and producing jingles. And we're going to show you one of those spots right now. It's something we produced for the American Cancer Society. You might recognize Robin Givens.
Light it up, drag it down, blow that smoke all around, dragon lady. Dressing fine, acting cool, what a shame you're a fool, dragon lady.
Don't be a smoking fool, you know it just ain't cool.
Girl, where you going with that dragon breath? When you walk in a room, no, they can't stand the fumes. Ooh, dragon lady.
Tell me, baby,
Tell me, baby.
why you smoke that trash?
Why, girl?
Everybody's saying
Woof.
you ain't got no class.
Can't you see what you are? You're a drag, yes you are.
Dragon lady,
A message for you and me from the American Cancer Society.
don't be a dragon lady.
Well, an example of taking a little bit of the creativity that we were using in our own lives and putting it to use in a good way.
So
Meanwhile, we were both moonlighting in the theater, and that meant auditioning, performing on the side.
now I started by taking part in New Playwrights Theater's Dramathon, which was a fundraising event that featured 72 straight hours of readings of new plays round the clock.
I was at Roundhouse Theater doing my first chance to be in Man of La Mancha, and then several other dinner theaters, the musicals that they were working on.
And then in 1982, we each saw an ad for an audition for New Playwrights Theater's production of Lives of the Great Composers by Timmy Grunman. I read for Anna Magdalena Bach, who was a parody of Lucy on the I Love Lucy show, and Scott read for Beethoven.
We met at the callbacks when the director, Ken Bloom, asked us to stand next to one another, much like this, on stage to see how we looked together.
You're very tall.
Yes.
And scene. That was our meet cute.
You swore you'd never date an actor. I offered you rides home so you wouldn't have to take the bus.
I was very nervous.
I know. You whistled a lot.
Yeah. Well, one thing led to another, and we got married in 1983, which coincidentally was the first year of the Helen Hayes Awards. And that's our local version of the Tony Awards. The first award show was written, produced, and directed by our friend Harry Bagdasian of New Playwrights Theater. He's since become our dear friend, and that friendship lasted until Harry died just last month.
So your first outing as a playwright lyricist was Dance Against Darkness, Living with AIDS, with music by Roy Barber.
And we wrote this piece as a response to the AIDS epidemic, which was decimating our theater community and other theater communities, arts communities around the country and the world. We left our jobs and took out a mortgage on a home, and we adopted our first pet, a dog named Stewbones Sondheim Cedar. Some of you knew him.
I had the opportunity to go on a 6-month national tour for the Kennedy Center, a production of Red Badge of Courage, directed by Richard Thomas. And 10 years later, I did a second tour for them, a commissioned opera called The Emperor's New Clothes.
You were the emperor. Now, there's a fun sidebar here. Scott and I actually ended up performing in the same theater on the same day in Sarasota, Florida. The Emperor's New Clothes performed in the afternoon for about 1,000 school kids, and the Capitol Steps performed that same evening in the same venue. Our dressing rooms were right across the hall from each other. It was beschert, as we say in Yiddish, sort of kismet.
Something else that was happening around that time was Baltimore and Richmond joined Washington in hosting a lot of film production. We were both day players. Some of the films and things we were engaged in: Terry Gilliam's 12 Monkeys, Homicide: Life on the Streets, Guarding Tess. Barry was in the Hallmark Hall of Fame's Miss Rose White with a wonderful actor whose name has just dropped out of my head. She was in Exorcist 3, and we did a lot of extra work as well in films that DC used as a primary location.
I left J. Walter Thompson to form a freelance writing business with Scott called Two Writers, No Waiting. Maximilian Schell, that's who you're trying to think of. Okay, there you go. Two Writers, No Waiting. And our projects included a 50-year history of giant food. We actually had an entire room in our house filled with boxes of historical documents. It was insane. It took us a long time, but we were proud of the result. We also wrote newsletters for MCI and catalogs for PBS Video.
When we were doing this, we were gaining a reputation for creating, directing, and performing comical sketches for associations, their openings, and generally large meetings in the city here. We hired our friends to work with us, our acting friends, our producing friends, our lighting friends. One gig took us and 3 of our actor friends to the south of Spain for a one-night-only show for Martin Marietta Data Systems called My Fair Trading Practice.
Now, this is called industrial theater. And if you're not familiar with it, check out the link that we've included for the documentary Bathtubs Over Broadway. Thank me later.
As you can see, DC area has given us a lot of opportunities, and we've tried to stretch our artistic wings.
Now, Scott has established himself not only as an actor, but as a painter as well. And his pieces are displayed in homes all over the country. And as you heard, for a year, he was artist in residence at Evergreen Museum in Baltimore. Now, just before the pandemic, he had completed roles in Ford's theater production of Into the Woods and First Stage's production of Trying.
Yes, and you were kind enough to mention that in the introduction. Barry spent almost 30 years writing and performing for the Capitol Steps, a political satire troupe. She also received multiple commissions to adapt operas into English for the in-series. You heard about that as well earlier in the introduction. One of the things that we'd like to do is share a few slides of our production photos from
It's sort
our-
of a montage.
Yes, if you will, a couple of minutes. But before we do, we'd like to mention to you a few things that we feel make this particular community remarkable for an artist. First of all, and probably the primary thing, is the audience. DC audiences are intelligent. Obviously, they're political. They're curious and they're savvy. These are all great qualities to promote thoughtful, innovative theater and any form of art.
We also had mentioned several of the philanthropists in our midst, but we also have the embassies and the corporations, many of whom discovered our theaters through the Helen Hayes Awards.
And finally, the people who create the theater, our actor types and friends, well, they're all cutthroats.
No.
Actually, we really support one another in this city, partly because we all have to do this work as professionals, non-professionals sometimes. Some of us are working all the time in jobs. We understand what it's like to work here as a theater. And as theater professionals, we're a tight-knit community. We compete with the Big Apple sometimes, and with Chicago as well.
Oh, speaking of which, we may compete with the Big Apple, but I have to tell you, because we are a smaller community of actors, we have an opportunity to work more and more reliably, I think, than some of the people who come down from the big city. For example, I was doing an early episode of Homicide. I was playing an emergency room nurse, and there were several real emergency room nurses working as the extras. And we also had a doctor who was being played by an actor who was hired from New York, and he came down. So unfortunately, the New York actor wasn't really prepared. He didn't know his lines at all. The director got very annoyed, and
He was a friend of the actor.
he
I
actually
believe.
was a friend
Yes.
of the actor. And so what ended up happening is, because since we were in the emergency room, we were all wearing surgical masks. So after we physically shot the scene, the director sent all the extras away and kept the two of us. And we did our lines wild or dry, as they say, just into a microphone with no other sound effects or hubbub around us. So that just shows you that you get quality when you get DC actors.
Barry and I and our dog Harpo, we just marked our first anniversary as part of the Cleveland Park, Woodley Park community. We couldn't be happier here. We're so grateful to our neighbors, and certainly we've been welcomed, and we thank you so much, Linda, for inviting us to share some of the parts of our life here. What's the future like in the theater and our community? Certainly no one knows at the moment. The pandemic has thrown many of us a curveball, but we like to think there are many seasons ahead for us.
And for you.
Right.
Now, here is a quick look at some of the production photos from our shows, as well as a little bit of Scott's artwork. And we'll be back afterwards to answer some questions. I'm a little verklempt, I have to say.
No, we want the audience to be verklempt, not you.
Well, all right, I am too.
We'd like to thank the composer of the music for
Mm-hmm.
that. He's a wonderful,
Amazing
Yes.
Hungarian composer named Tibor Zonai. He actually found my website and asked me to collaborate with him on a musical he had written. And we currently have a children's show about young Ben Franklin waiting in the wings with a book by local playwright Ernie Joslowitz.
so if you'd like to see that, we hope to see it too.
Yeah, we do.
And now we're looking forward to some of your questions,
Mhm.
Pat. Thank you so much for
I
taking care of that for us.
thank you so much. That was just very interesting and fun. You've had remarkable careers. There are quite a few questions in the chat, and I'm just going to start going down the list. But please, those of you who are in the audience, feel free to add more. Hopefully, we can get all the way to the end. The first one we have, which is probably of interest to many people, is will the Capitol Steps make a comeback?
That's hard to say right now. My instinct is that it's not going to happen, at least not right away. But that was a hard one for all of us.
Certainly for Barry. And I don't know if you had a chance to see the Washington Post article, which
yeah.
described this. And it does reveal some of the reasoning behind the companies deciding to do that. It's a difficult time for musical, for
Political satirists, although
satire, and
there is-
certainly also for musical theater in general. So
Yeah, since we did live theater, there was no real live theater for quite a while after the pandemic started, and that made it difficult for to arrange for bookings, because if you were going to do bookings, then somebody in the theater got sick or one of us got sick, that would throw everything up in the air.
there has been interest. We know that several of the Capitol Steps have been pursuing a little something. They're trying their best to figure out something, and they've been asked to book a couple of times. So we hope that something will happen with that. I'm not sure how Barry will deal
Watch
with it.
this space.
Yeah, watch that space. She's also she's moved on in some respects to some other choices here. So we'll see.
How has political humor changed over the years? How do you see that as having changed?
Well, I'll give you a quick summary of this article. It said essentially that the politicization, which is of course another word people use for divisive, the conflict that is now surrounding our debates and political choices, make it difficult for people to laugh at themselves. I think the Capitol Steps are essential for this purpose. And,
I agree.
And we hope theater is a very important part of our getting back to seeing one another as human beings and having discussions, which the theater can do. However, as you may know from late night TV, almost every comic on television that has a late night show does a monologue at the beginning, which is political. And one of the people that I read for the Smithsonian was Will Rogers, who was a political comedian. And he said, I found all of my material by looking at the newspaper and reading about the Congress. So it's a wonderful, rich place for comedy.
That's
but
right.
it's-
Federal government is a gold mine always for political comedy, no matter what era you're looking at.
But at the moment, it's tough. And if one of the things that the Capitol Steps had in its favor was a very strong, loyal audience, it also had a very strong and smart office. So any group that's starting now has to build both of those things up. And that's a hard job.
What was your favorite parody? Can you sing a little bit of it, maybe?
Let's see. Can you ask him another question and I will come back to it? I'll have to think of something.
Well, one of the questions actually in the chat is was Mad Magazine an influence on the Capitol
Oh,
Theater?
absolutely. I still have all my Mad magazines. When we made, we had to downsize a lot when we moved to from our house to the apartment. But the one thing I would not give up is my old Mad magazine. So yes, indeed, all of those song parodies really influenced me from the very beginning.
And this is again where we can thank Barry's mother and father, especially her father, for influencing her, because he was a very, very funny guy himself and a very political person. So we have the product of that union. His mother, her mother was a soldier. What was the?
My mother was in the
Both
service.
of them
She
were.
was. They met in the service.
Right.
And actually, my father was being punished, and he was painting the ladies' room on the base, and as punishment. And that's where he met my mother.
She was his superior.
Yes,
in
and he
rank.
painted her name on all the stalls. So
There you
what
go.
can I tell you?
That's quite a story. Scott, you toured with the Kennedy Center. Can you talk a little bit more about that, and particularly how you found audiences around the country to be different from one another or different from Washington?
That's a lovely question, and I'm very happy to speak to that. The tour, the Red Badge of Courage tour, was the first one that the Kennedy Center sent out as part of its Theater for Young Audiences. And Richard Thomas was wonderful to work with on that piece.
He's coming back.
Yeah, he's coming
with,
to the Kennedy Center for
To Kill a
To
Mockingbird.
Kill a Mockingbird. So we're looking forward to seeing him in that. In our tour, 6 months, we met. I think we went to 32 different cities, and in the second tour, we calculated there were something like 50,000 young children that we saw or performed for. To answer your question about the differences, imagine you're coming into Ames, Iowa, and the children have been up for 3 hours on a bus to get to you to see the performance that you're doing. Fortunately, in the second show, it was a lot of fun and they had a lot of laughter because obviously the emperor shows up without clothes at some point. I had a beautiful, beautiful, lovely costumes as the emperor. And then of course I came out in garters and a red underwear, and we had a lot of laughter, a lot of fun with that. Going to Maine is so much different than going to Texas. Lots of different parts of the country have different perspectives on theater. Maine, or as Barry can tell you, Alaska is hungry, really, really hungry for theater. And not that Texas is not, but they have so much more opportunity in Dallas, say, or Fort Worth, which was one of our first stops. We often were asked to interview with the children and answer questions for them. There are some educational aspects to it, and I really very much enjoyed that. It's a lovely program, and many of the performers here in town have gone out on these tours. Laura Gianarelli is a wonderful, wonderful actress, and I remember meeting her in Chicago in a different cast. So we were rolling in from one place. All this is in a bus, by the way, and we had a truck and a bus, and we're driving from Minnesota to Missouri and then down to Florida and spending a whole month in Florida and coming back and going. It's quite a long and arduous task, but a wonderful one at that.
All right. I'm going to get back to Barry about her favorite parody, unless you tell me you need more time to think about it.
I'll probably need more time, but I think one of my favorites was doing Sarah Palin. I did Sarah Palin in Alaska right after she was tapped to be the vice presidential nominee. So I had no clue how it was going to go. And fortunately, because it's live theater, you can't, you just have to commit. You have to go out there, and whatever comes back at you, you just have to be ready for it. And I sang a song called that I had written called Neiman's is a Girl's Best Friend, that ended, Would anyone you know trade Paris for Juno? Neiman's is a girl's best friend. So there's a little
There you go.
squib of that.
We may ask you to do another one in a few minutes.
Oh my God. Okay.
Let's ask
I have a
more-
suggestion for you on that. You might ask her to tell a story about the Disney World in France. That's an interesting little
Oh,
story.
yeah. Euro Disney.
Yes,
Well,
please.
go right ahead.
No. Let's let her
You
give
keep
her a
going.
second.
All right.
Give her a second.
Well, let me go to another question, which is a little bit more serious. Where do theaters go from here? There clearly have been changes because of the pandemic. Are they here to stay?
Well, that's
is
a
it
very,
different?
very good question. I think, fortunately, I believe we're going to be able to say yes. And I think this is part of the picture. The cities have been pretty good, and on the East Coast in particular, about getting the vaccines, having a protocol, and that means that there are rules about going to the theater, and I think patrons are willing to do those rules, follow those rules, so that they can enjoy the theater. It's been terrible for many people, and especially, the older audiences are great supporters of opera and many of the things that Barry and I are a part of. Now we're the older people. I know that I'm saying that, but frankly, that audience is a critical part of our audience. It's a critical part of the picture of support in the theater. For them to fear coming and having some problem, it's a terrible thing.
Yeah.
We mentioned the trying at First Stage. I couldn't have been closer to the audience. In fact, I think we probably shared breath with the audience because it's a very intimate space. And we were in the garret we were in the top of a garage in Georgetown. This is where the play takes place, and this is where the judge ended his life. And in order to have that intimacy, we are very close in proximity to everybody. So I'm spouting poetry and all the things that this wonderful man was capable of, and the people are very, very close. So, this was something very much in my mind when we had to come up against this, and I said, this is the way it is. However, all of our theater directors in town have been very, very, very cautious, very careful. They've been following a very strict set of rules. I think they've actually gone farther than many, many people. So I suspect that we'll be okay here in the city. And I think New York is also trying to make this work, and we'll have it working soon.
Well, that's good news.
Yeah.
If you have a limited budget as a theater goer, but you would like to see more theater in DC, are there any tips or particular theaters that you recommend?
Well, I think one of the wonderful things is that, and people have to be able to go online and willing to go online for some of these things, but DC Theater Scene, for instance, gives you a lovely set of reviews of what's going on in the city, and that includes the smaller theaters. Many of the smaller theaters.
There's some great smaller theaters that don't charge a lot for tickets, and I'm imagining that as the theaters start reopening, that the powers that be at these theaters will be sensitive to the fact that the people have not been to the shows for a while, and maybe do more pay what you can nights, or offer discounts. And so I think that might be a good possibility. But like I said, if some of these theaters come back, some of them won't. But if some of the ones that come back, not all of them are expensive. So
one of the places we can certainly point to, and Linda had mentioned to us that she was on the board at Constellation Theater, that is housed in a wonderful building on 14th Street, which probably came about because theaters came in and made 14th Street a place where people could come. The Source Theater has and houses several different theater companies. So if you go there, simply go there, or look for the Source Theater, you're going to get a variety of opportunities. They have dance there. They have the in-series does many different things, poetry and operas and all sorts of things. And then Constellation does fantastic
And
work.
gala.
Right, Gala Hispanic is another one. They have been in business, by the way. They have, just before the pandemic, had to replace their air conditioner and replaced it with a fantastic one with a great filter. So they were ready.
They were
for this mess.
ready
Yeah,
ahead of
they were ahead
time,
of time.
before the pandemic even hit.
But they also use their space and offered it to other groups, smaller groups, as does the theater on 8th Street. And this is another part of our city that
The
has
Atlas.
grown by virtue of the theaters. 8th Street was a tough neighborhood
Mm-hmm.
before, but theaters went in there, and they now have 4-star restaurants down there on 8th Street. So if you want to go down there
Mm-hmm. Because
and enjoy it.
all the businesses around theaters benefit from having theaters in the area. Atlas has several different theaters. They have a black box theater. They have a large theater. They have, which
they
is
have
a
a cabaret
Springer.
theater,
They have a
yeah.
cabaret theater. So I've had several things as a lyricist or playwright. I've had several things produced there in various different different theaters there, and it's a terrific venue.
Yeah, and the tickets there are reasonable, very reasonable. By contrast to, I mean, New York right now it's obscene in many respects, and I think the theater community is upset about that. We watched a documentary, and they were talking about $1,000 seats to some of the new.
This is pre-pandemic.
Yeah, well,
Wow. Well, speaking of that, how can the local theater community, particularly now as it's kind of reemerging, how can it motivate local young talent to return to or to stay in DC?
well, we have some help in that there is a traditional competition in the Virginia schools called VHS, Virginia High School League, VHSL. I was invited to be a judge at this many years ago. I still do it. And just this 2 months ago, last month, anyway,
last
2
month.
Saturdays.
It's hard to tell. Nobody knows what day of the week it is anyway.
So the theater instructors, the teachers in the schools are often directing shows, and they will direct a 1-act play. And the students will enter in this contest, and they will go up against 6 of their other competing schools, and they will try to go to the state. Of course, this is a little like football. I mention this because I had the opportunity to speak to those students, as I was finishing the judging, and along with 4 other judges. And if you will, kind of imagine watching students get on a stage with their props, very excited, all the lighting, and then performing a play, a pretty good lengthy play with a mask on. And in a big auditorium. Most of those theater schools now have gigantic auditoriums. And it was heartbreaking in some respects to watch them do this, because I know how much energy that takes, how much excitement, how much they're putting into this. And, we can't even see their faces, frankly, to enjoy what they're doing. It was very encouraging. Also, it showed me that the young people are anxious to be out there again. They're excited to do it. A few thoughts about that. How can we support them better? Well, those small theaters that you're talking about are often the place where young actors get to test things out, try out their wings. Dinner theater was a great opportunity for me to learn how to be an older actor, a bigger actor. So anyway, a couple of ideas.
I'm going to go back to the parodies. And before I take us back to Disney in Paris, were there copyright issues? Margie asked, copyright issues in writing these song parodies? How did you handle those?
Yeah, this is an interesting question, a good question, because that issue came up with the band Two Live Crew, because they had sampled something from Roy Orbison, and there was a Supreme Court case about whether they were allowed to do that. Well, we filed an amicus brief with Bill Strauss, who was one of our co-founders, along with Elena Newport and Jim Idala. Bill was a lawyer, and he filed this brief and showed that there was a history since the beginning of our country of political parodies. And when that was presented, the Supreme Court said, well, it's okay by us. So we have not had copyright issues. When we do our albums, sorry, hard to talk in the past tense. When we did our albums, we would credit all the original writers, composers, and the publishing companies. So nobody's work got used without acknowledgement, and we never had any complaints from, or we never got any calls about not using something. So
This is a ticklish issue, though, because we know many musicians who are not getting enough money back from their work. They're not getting paid particularly well from Spotify, and their recordings are being heard many different places, but there's just not quite enough. I know I shouldn't talk too much about that because I don't know a whole lot about it, but we'll pass on that one.
So can we go back to Disney in Paris?
okay,
Oh,
I'll
yeah.
try. I'll
Imagine,
try
if
to
you will,
remember
I'll set
this.
the
No,
scene.
don't set it. Please don't build it up too much. I've been away from this song for many, many years. So actually, it's two guys who come out working for Euro Disney, and they start out with the "You're a pest, go away, I need my rest. You can't buy your souvenirs with your American excess. Don't ask me for bonjours. In France, Mickey says, up yours. Wait on you, you must be joking. Go away, I'm busy smoking.
At which point, an audience member stood
Yes.
up. This was the French woman who said, "Wait, I must speak, I must speak, I must
Like,
speak."
wait.
Sorry.
He's been studying German.
Yeah.
So anyway, this happens sometimes. This woman in a public show ran to the front, ran down to the stage and turned and looked at everybody and said, "I am from France. I wish to speak. We are not like this," but, and what do you do? What do you do? You just roll with it.
That's right. Okay, what are some good acting? Someone asks, where are the best acting classes, both for young people and for adults?
That's
In Georgetown, there's the theater lab, and we would encourage a lot of people to go there because we have a number of friends who teach there. Roundhouse Theater
oh yes.
often has a wonderful program during the summer, especially.
Our friend Kevin Corbett, also who was in the Capitol Steps, teaches at Roundhouse.
There's and many of the and this is, I'm sorry, this is pre-pandemic thinking here, but even the Shakespeare Theater has an educational department. They have the outreach that goes to schools and talks about what it's like to be a performer or shares Shakespeare. And those are opportunities for students in school, but during the summer or during the year. I have taught classes at Roundhouse Theater, and I can tell you they are very well organized. They take very good care of their students. So many of the theaters have a program, and if you would like to look into them, I would suggest just checking into the theater.
Also Imagination Stage.
Yes, an excellent place.
I'm going to ask one of my own, and that is for each of you. What is the role, or perhaps in Barry's case, the lyrics that you're most proud of?
Well, you probably saw a few of the photos of Man of La Mancha that was produced at the Atlas by the Washington Savoyards, and I was very, very honored to be part of that production. It's a great story, and Cervantes is one of the roles, Don Quixote is the second role, and there is the older gentleman, Alonso Quijana. So an actor gets to play three roles in one fabulous musical. So I'd say that one's very proud of that.
And for me, my favorite libretto was Abduction from the Seraglio by Mozart. It basically is the story of a pasha who kidnaps she's a member of royalty, and he takes her away and he wants her to love him, but he's a barbarian and she's a member of the royal family, and there's just no way that this can happen. And I happened to be, it was exactly the same time of year, because I was watching TCM, and they showed a movie called The Westerner about Judge Roy Bean and his infatuation with Lily Langtry. And in fact, he named he was the sheriff of a town. He named the whole town Langtry after her. And Walter Brennan played Judge Roy Bean. And I thought, wow, this would be a great way to reset this story. So I made this story about Judge Roy Bean and Lily Langtry, where he kidnaps her and brings her back to this teeny town in Texas in around 1880, and tries to get her to fall in love with him. And I thought this production at the In Series was so fantastic. I just loved it, and I loved writing it. You know something is. It's good when it comes out of, when the writing comes out of you faster, almost faster than you can think it. And so I would say that's one of my favorite librettos.
And where was that performed? You say it was performed at In Series. Has it been performed elsewhere?
That was at the Source.
Yes,
that was at Source Theater.
And that was a small, intimate space for a big play, a big opera like that.
And it's so great. A lot of people have a lot of audiences have said how much they appreciate being in these seeing opera in these small spaces where you were so close to the performers. And it really brings a different energy level to the whole performance.
If you're sitting and an opera singer is singing close to you, it's a different experience, much different than the Kennedy Center.
I'm sure that's true. What has made Cleveland and Woodley Park so enticing for you that you chose to live here?
Well, I don't think any of the pictures showed too much of my braces or my leg. I wear leg braces now, and I use forearm crutches. And this came about because I had polio as a child when I was 1, and about 40 years later, I started having some difficulty. I started falling down steps. I fortunately was able to manage to get some help. It took a little while doing it, but we were living in a house that had 3 floors, and I was using chair stairs and all that stuff. And I kept saying to Barry, this is not going to work forever. We're getting a little older. What if one of us gets sick? What if And fortunately, my brother was able to help us find and help us make this happen here.
This space that we're in now is in Woodley Park Towers, and it used to be a commercial space. It was actually the beauty parlor that was here for many years.
No, we're sitting where you would get your hair
where
washed.
you get your hair washed. So, and it was still an operating beauty parlor when we first looked at the space. But there is also behind us spaces that were used to be a deli and a child psychologist and a real estate office, and they were all owned by the people who ran the beauty parlor. So Scott's brother told us, just find a shell. You just need a shell, and you're gonna we'll just design it the way you're gonna need it later, and it'll be the kind of space that you'll enjoy living in. So that's what we did. We bought it, and
We should
torn
mention
apart
that
and-
we've always loved this neighborhood. Many of our friends love this neighborhood. We have several actor friends, three of them that live nearby.
Right.
One is in the Kennedy Warren, another one's very, very close by in an apartment building.
Another thing is people in this neighborhood have been very welcoming to us, especially our neighbors. And there are a lot of dogs in this area, which of course Harpo adores, and so do we. And the restaurants and the shopping. I mean, you can walk to everything. The subway. It's such a cool little neighborhood that and everything is walkable. So.
We're
Some of
very
the thing-
happy.
Yeah,
Into
we are.
that.
Mhm.
We have a question here that's interesting. We only have time for maybe one or two more. But it says Washington is important in Black history. How can we support Black theater, Black salons and Black voices? How do we make sure that Black theater is not just white?
Well, Jennifer Nelson, which we mentioned early in this program, is a wonderful, beautiful Black woman who recently wrote an article about how to support Black theater. And
We should
one of the
probably put a
things-
link to that.
Yes, perhaps we can offer that. She suggested that certainly, it's great to have casting that includes Black actors, but telling the stories of Black people and the Black Americans, Black is the job of the playwright. So probably the answer to this is start with the playwrights. Start supporting the playwrights. If there's a theater in town like New Playwrights Theater, many of the theaters now are actually courting playwrights
To tell these stories.
And sadly, there's kind of a wrinkle here because big plays are expensive to put on, difficult to put on. It's hard to get backing for them. But how can you write a mystery play that's only 3 people? It's
Right.
silly. There's a lot of
Somebody actually
constraints.
was soliciting 10-minute plays with no more than 3 characters, 2 chairs and a table, and it had to be a murder mystery.
A comedy
with
murder
3
mystery.
people.
Yeah.
I mean,
Go.
it's
Go
insane.
ahead. You got it.
So listen, before we wrap up, I know Frank wanted to see Harpo, and he's upstairs, but here's Harpo. So if you see us walking down the street, please stop and say hello.
I'm not going to let you go quite yet. 30 seconds for each of you. What is next for each of you?
Fortunately, at the end of this month, I am going to San Francisco to work on a little film of a play that I've been reading since the pandemic began. This was going to be a play that was going to take place during the summer at the DC Fringe. It's about the era after the assassination of Lincoln, when Thaddeus Stevens was fighting for some of the rights that Lincoln had imagined. And the difficult time was, the playwright here was inspired by the story of Andrew Johnson as being many of the issues that were back then are contemporary issues as well. So I'm fortunately getting to go and work for a little over a week on creating a film that will be shown probably in high schools. And so I'm looking very much forward to that. Learning lines right now.
Sounds wonderful.
And I am, I'm
Writing a
going to be,
parody? Parody? You've written a parody?
yes, I'm still writing parodies, and I wrote a jingle for a healthcare campaign in Virginia that we're producing before the end of this month, and also
Making work for another one of our friends. by the
right,
way.
and also I started directing plays for Zoom players
Yes.
online, which is a whole new thing for me, and I'm enjoying it.
And we're both learning. We're actually using our directing skills in that way right now. So thank you so much for all those
We're
wonderful
so-
questions, Pat.
yeah.
I guess we're at the end of our
Yeah.
Thank you.
road.
Yeah,
Thank you for
I have-
having us.
back to Linda.
That was terrific. Barry and Scott, thank you so much for sharing your great stories, your perspective on where DC Theater might go next and what a life you've led. Welcome to the neighborhood. Thanks also to Frank Finnemore of the Village for working behind the scenes to make the technology go smoothly, and to Pat Whitty for moderating a terrific Q&A. We always thank the audience. We hope you'll be back on April 19th when educator Dr. Margarita Calderon will discuss her latest book, Beyond Crises, Overcoming Linguistic and Cultural Inequities in Communities and Classrooms. She'll be in discussion with historian Amy Henderson. Until then, be well, stay safe. Thank you. Good night, everyone.